The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek, Montana, in 1876, sending Elizabeth Vance running toward the sheriff's office with her wedding dress billowing behind her. Tears streamed down her face as she fled from the church where her fiancé's body now lay cold on the altar steps, blood staining his Sunday suit. She had watched in horror as the notorious Blackwell gang burst through the doors and fired, claiming her betrothed had stolen something valuable from them. Now, with nowhere else to turn, she sought refuge from Sheriff Harmon, a man known more for his iron fist than his compassion. "Please, you have to help me," Elizabeth begged, her honey blonde hair falling loose from its elaborate wedding updo as she burst into the sheriff's office. "They killed Richard. They'll come after me next." Sheriff Harmon's weathered face remained impassive as he looked up from his desk. "The Blackwell boys don't make false accusations, Miss Vance. Was your man mixed up in something?" "No, Richard was honest as the day is long," she protested, gripping the edge of the desk with trembling hands. "We were to be married today." The sheriff rose slowly, towering over her petite frame. "I reckon I should keep you someplace safe until we sort this out. Wouldn't want a pretty little thing like you getting hurt." There was something in his tone that made Elizabeth's skin crawl. Before she could respond, 2 deputies entered, nodding to the sheriff. "Found something interesting in the dead man's saddlebag, Sheriff. Looks like what the Blackwell's been looking for." Sheriff Harmon's mouth twisted into an ugly smile. "Well now, seems your beau wasn't as honest as you thought." He turned to his deputies. "Lock her in the barn out back. We'll decide what to do with her after I meet with the Blackwells. But I've done nothing wrong." Elizabeth protested as rough hands grabbed her arms. "Maybe not," Sheriff Harmon replied, his eyes cold, "but you might be useful all the same. The Blackwells might pay handsomely to get their hands on the bride of the man who crossed them." The deputies dragged Elizabeth through the back door of the jail and across the yard to a sturdy wooden barn. They thrust her inside, the heavy door closing with a thud before she heard the distinctive sound of a padlock being secured. Alone in the dimly lit space, Elizabeth sank onto a bale of hay, her white wedding dress now smudged with dirt and tears. The barn smelled of horses and hay, with dust motes dancing in the thin streams of light filtering through cracks in the wooden walls. She had lost everything in a matter of hours: her fiancé, her future, and now possibly her life. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the barn floor, Elizabeth heard voices outside. Sheriff Harmon was speaking with someone, his tone obsequious in a way she'd never heard before. She crept closer to the wall, straining to hear. "She's in there, just as I promised," the sheriff was saying. "Pretty little thing, still in her wedding dress. I figure she's worth at least double what we agreed, considering the circumstances." "We'll see," came a gruff reply. "The boss wants to make an example of anyone connected to that thieving bastard." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. The sheriff was selling her to the Blackwells, the very men who had murdered Richard. She backed away from the wall, desperately searching for any means of escape. The barn had no windows large enough for her to squeeze through, and the only door was secured from the outside. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, Elizabeth heard a soft thud from the rear of the barn. A loose board moved slightly, and she held her breath as it was carefully pried away. A man's face appeared in the opening hansom, with piercing blue eyes and several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. "Don't scream," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "I'm here to help you." Elizabeth remained frozen as the stranger removed several more boards, creating a hole large enough for him to slip through. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in worn denim and leather, with a cowboy hat pulled low over his forehead. A gun belt hung at his hip, but it was his eyes that held her attention. They were kind despite the obvious tension in his face. "Who are you?" she whispered, clutching her ruined wedding dress. "Name's Levi Caldwell," he replied, quickly scanning the barn. "I've been tracking the Blackwells for months. Your fiancé contacted me last week, said he had information that could help bring them down." "Richard never mentioned you," Elizabeth said, suspicion coloring her tone. "He was protecting you." Levi moved toward the barn door, listening intently. "The less you knew, the safer you'd be." Unfortunately, the Blackwells found out he was working with me before he could pass along what he'd discovered. Elizabeth's mind reeled with this new information. Had Richard been living a double life? Was that why the Blackwells had targeted him? "We need to move now," Levi said, returning to her side. "Sheriff's in their pocket. He's stalling them with negotiations while they wait for the rest of their gang to arrive. Once they do, they'll kill you both, the sheriff because they don't need him anymore and you because of what you might know." "But I don't know anything," Elizabeth protested. Levi's expression softened momentarily. "Doesn't matter to them. You're connected to Richard, that's enough." He reached for her hand. "Come with me if you want to live." Elizabeth hesitated, torn between fear of this stranger and the certain danger waiting outside the barn. "How do I know I can trust you?" Levi's expression hardened as he looked toward the barn door. "You don't, but right now I'm your only chance." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "I promised Richard I'd protect you if anything happened to him. He loved you something fierce, madam." That small detail, the recognition of Richard's love for her, made Elizabeth's decision. She nodded and placed her hand in his. Levi led her to the opening he'd created. "It'll be a tight squeeze in that dress." Elizabeth gathered the voluminous skirts of her wedding gown. "I'll manage." As she prepared to crawl through the opening, voices approached the barn door. The padlock rattled. "Go." Levi urged, pushing her toward the hole. Elizabeth scrambled through, the delicate lace of her dress catching and tearing on the rough wood. Once outside, she found herself in the growing darkness behind the sheriff's property. Levi followed quickly, replacing the boards as best he could before taking her hand again. "My horse is tethered in the trees over there," he whispered, pointing to a small copse about 50 yards away. "We need to move quietly," and the barn door crashed open behind them, followed by a shout of alarm. "Run," Levi commanded, drawing his pistol. Elizabeth gathered her skirts and ran, her white dress practically glowing in the twilight. Behind them, more shouts erupted, followed by the crack of gunfire. She felt Levi's hand at her back, urging her forward as bullets whistled past. They reached the trees, where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited. Levi boosted Elizabeth onto the horse's back before swinging up behind her. He kicked the animal into motion just as several figures emerged from behind the barn, guns blazing. "Hold on tight," Levi called, wrapping one arm around Elizabeth's waist while holding the reins with his other hand. The horse thundered away from Willow Creek, each powerful stride carrying them further from danger. Elizabeth clung to the saddle horn, her wedding dress billowing behind her like a flag of surrender to this new, unexpected fate. As they crested a hill, and the lights of the town receded behind them, Levi finally slowed the horse to a more manageable pace. Elizabeth's heart was pounding, her mind struggling to process the day's horrific events. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of the horse's breathing. "I have a cabin about 20 miles west of here," Levi replied. "We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move." "Our next move?" Elizabeth twisted to look at him. "I don't even know you, Mr. Caldwell." Levi's expression was solemn in the moonlight. "You don't have to know me to understand that those men back there want you dead, and they won't stop looking." "Because of something Richard had," Elizabeth pressed. "What was it?" Levi was silent for a moment. "A ledger. Details of the Blackwell's operations, names, dates, bribes paid, enough to hang the lot of them. And you think I have it? No, but they might think Richard told you where it is." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "Did he give you anything for safekeeping?" "Say anything unusual before the wedding?" Elizabeth thought back to her last conversation with Richard. He had seemed distracted, nervous even. "He gave me a locket this morning, said it was a wedding gift from his mother and that I should wear it always." Levi's posture stiffened. "Do you have it with you?" Elizabeth's hand moved to her throat, where the gold locket still hung. "Yes." "May I see it?" She hesitated, then unclasped the chain and handed it to him. Levi examined it carefully in the moonlight, his fingers working at the edge until there was a small click. The back of the locket popped open, revealing not a portrait but a tiny folded paper. "I believe this is what they're after," Levi said softly, carefully extracting the paper. "Probably a key to where the ledger is hidden." Elizabeth felt a wave of betrayal. "He never told me." "He was protecting you," Levi said, tucking the paper inside his shirt. The less you knew, the safer you'd be if things went wrong. Well, things certainly went wrong, Elizabeth replied bitterly. He's dead, I'm being hunted, and I'm fleeing town with a stranger on my wedding day. Levi was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry about Richard. He was a good man, brave. How did you know him? I'm a Pinkerton agent, Levi explained. Been tracking the Blackwell gang for almost a year now. Your Richard was a bank clerk who noticed some irregularities in accounts connected to them. He reached out to the agency, and they assigned me to work with him. Elizabeth processed this information. So you're a lawman, of sorts, more of a detective. Levi adjusted their course slightly. The Blackwells have half the local law enforcement on their payroll. That's why we couldn't go through official channels. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic motion of the horse and the emotional exhaustion of the day making Elizabeth drowsy despite her precarious situation. She found herself leaning back against Levi's chest, her eyes growing heavy. Rest if you can, he said softly. We've got a long ride ahead. Elizabeth didn't intend to sleep, but the steady heartbeat at her back and the gentle sway of the horse lulled her into unconsciousness. She awoke with a start when the horse stopped moving. We're here, Levi said, dismounting and reaching up to help her down. In the pale pre-dawn light, Elizabeth could make out the shape of a small cabin nestled among pine trees. It was simple but sturdy looking, with a small porch and chimney. Levi led his horse to a lean-to at the side of the cabin before escorting Elizabeth to the door. Inside, the cabin was spare but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a cupboard, and a narrow bed in the corner. A worn bearskin rug covered part of the plank floor. It's not much, Levi said, lighting a lamp, but it's secure. No one knows about this place. Elizabeth stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly very aware of her disheveled appearance and the intimate setting. Mr. Caldwell, Levi, please. Levi, she amended. What happens now? He moved to the fireplace, kneeling to arrange kindling and logs. Now we decode whatever message is in that locket, find the ledger, and use it to bring down the Blackwells. And then... Levi glanced up at her, the flame of the match he'd struck illuminating his face. Then you'll be free to go wherever you please. He turned back to the fire. But first, we both need rest. As the fire caught and began to warm the cabin, Levi retrieved a shirt and trousers from a trunk. These belong to my younger brother. They might fit you better than that dress for now. Elizabeth accepted the clothes gratefully. Your brother won't mind, a shadow crossed Levi's face. He died 2 years ago. Blackwells robbed the stagecoach he was driving. I'm sorry, Elizabeth said softly, understanding now why this mission was personal for him. Levi nodded once, then turned away. I'll wait outside while you change. When he had gone, Elizabeth peeled off her ruined wedding dress. The symbolic weight of removing it wasn't lost on her. She was shedding not just a garment, but the life she had expected to have. She folded it carefully, then pulled on the offered clothes. The trousers felt strange after a lifetime of skirts, but there was an undeniable practicality to them. You can come back in, she called when she was decent. Levi returned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in his brother's clothes. They suit you, he said simply. Thank you for everything. Elizabeth sat at the table, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I still can't believe any of this is happening. Levi put a kettle on the small cast iron stove. We should examine that paper from the locket. He retrieved it from his shirt and carefully unfolded it on the table. The tiny square contained nothing but a series of numbers and letters. A code, Elizabeth murmured, leaning closer. Richard was clever. He wouldn't make it easy to find. Levi studied the paper. Do you recognize anything about these numbers, any pattern? Elizabeth stared at the sequence. Wait. These first numbers, 0623, that's my birthday, June 23rd. Levi looked at her with new respect. That's it. He used something personal to you, something the Blackwells wouldn't know. Together, they worked on deciphering the code as dawn broke outside. The combination of Elizabeth's knowledge of Richard's habits and Levi's experience with ciphers gradually revealed a location, the old mining office at the edge of town, where Richard had hidden the ledger in a specific floorboard. We'll need to go back to retrieve it, Levi said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. Back to Willow Creek, but they'll be looking for us. Not until tomorrow. We'll rest today, travel by night, and be in and out before anyone knows we're there." Elizabeth took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee. "You make it sound simple." "Nothing about this is simple," Levi admitted. "But it's necessary. That ledger is the key to ending the Blackwell's reign of terror across 3 territories. And avenging your brother," Elizabeth added softly. Levi's blue eyes met hers. "And your fiancé." A connection formed between them in that moment, a shared purpose born of loss and injustice. Elizabeth felt some of her fear give way to determination. "I want to help," she said firmly. "Richard died for this. I need to see it through." Levi studied her for a long moment. "It'll be dangerous. My life is already in danger. At least this way I'm fighting back." A ghost of a smile touched Levi's lips. "You're braver than you know, Elizabeth Vance." "Ellie," she corrected him. "My friends call me Ellie." He nodded, accepting the offered familiarity. "You should get some sleep, Ellie. Take the bed, I'll keep watch." Though she protested, Levi insisted, and Elizabeth's exhaustion won out. She lay down on the narrow bed, pulling a worn quilt over herself. Despite the strange surroundings and the trauma of the day, she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. When she woke, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Levi was at the table, cleaning a rifle with practiced efficiency. He looked up when she stirred. "Feel better?" Elizabeth nodded, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. "How long did I sleep?" "About 8 hours. You needed it." She noticed then that he had dark circles under his eyes. "You should rest too before we leave." "I will," he promised, reassembling the rifle. "First, let's get some food in you." He prepared a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. As they ate, Elizabeth found herself studying her unexpected protector. In the daylight, she could see details she'd missed before: a thin scar along his jawline, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the calluses on his hands speaking of a life of hard work. "How did you become a Pinkerton?" she asked. Levi seemed surprised by the question. "After the war, I drifted for a while. Worked as a scout for the army, then as a deputy in Colorado. The Pinkertons recruited me 3 years ago." "You fought in the war," he nodded. "Union cavalry. I was just a boy when I enlisted, 17 and full of grand ideas about glory." His expression turned wry. "Lost those notions quick enough. And your family? Besides your brother, I mean. Parents died when I was young. It was just me and Matthias for most of my life." Levi set down his fork. "What about you? Any family who'll be worried about you?" Elizabeth shook her head. "My father passed last winter. Mother's been gone 10 years now. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but we're not close." "So there was just Richard," Levi said softly. "Yes, we were to start our own family." Elizabeth felt tears threatening again and forced them back. "But that's gone now." Levi reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly. "I'm sorry, Ellie." The simple human contact, the first gentle touch she'd experienced since the chaos began, nearly undid her composure. She pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. I should wash up before we leave." Levi pointed her to a basin of water he'd prepared. "There's soap there and a comb. I'll check on the horse while you get ready." When he'd gone outside, Elizabeth allowed herself a moment of grief, silent tears falling as she washed her face and attempted to bring order to her hair. By the time Levi returned, she had composed herself again, her resolve strengthened. "I found something that might help with our disguises," Levi said, holding up a bundle. He unwrapped it to reveal a man's hat and coat and a faded dress. "These were in a trunk. The dress belonged to a woman who stayed here, once a witness I was protecting." Elizabeth took the dress, noting it was simple and practical, nothing like her ruined wedding gown. "Thank you. I'll wait outside again." The dress was a little large but serviceable. Elizabeth had just finished buttoning it when a sound outside caught her attention, the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Caldwell," a gruff voice called. "We know you're in there. Send out the girl and maybe we'll let you live." Elizabeth's heart hammered in her chest. How had they found the cabin so quickly? Levi appeared at the window, his expression grim. "Stay down," he whispered. "There are 3 of them. How did they find us? Must have followed our trail." Levi moved to the fireplace, lifting a loose stone to reveal a hidden compartment containing extra ammunition. "We need to hold them off until dark, then slip away through the back." What if we can't? Elizabeth asked, fear evident in her voice. Levi checked his revolver, his movements calm despite the danger. We will, I'm not letting them take you, another voice called from outside. 10 seconds, Caldwell, then we start shooting. Levi moved to Elizabeth's side, his eyes intense. When I give the signal, run for the back door. Head straight for the thicket of pines and keep going, I'll find you. I'm not leaving you, she protested. You have to, I'll cover you. His hand gripped her shoulder. Trust me, Ellie. Before she could argue further, the front window shattered as a bullet tore through it. Levi pushed Elizabeth to the floor just as more shots followed, splintering wood and sending glass flying. Stay down, he shouted, returning fire through the broken window. Elizabeth crawled toward the back of the cabin as Levi engaged the attackers. The exchange of gunfire was deafening in the small space. Through a gap in the wall, she could see 3 men taking cover behind trees and rocks, their attention focused on the front of the cabin where Levi was putting up a fierce defense. Now, Ellie, Levi called during a momentary lull. Go. She hesitated only a second before rushing to the back door. As she flung it open, a shot rang out different from the others, coming from the trees behind the cabin. Pain exploded in her upper arm and she stumbled, falling to her knees with a cry. Ellie. Levi's voice was anguished. He appeared beside her in an instant, firing rapidly at a 4th attacker she hadn't seen. The man fell, but the distraction had cost them their chance at escape. The other 3 were now circling toward the back of the cabin. Levi dragged Elizabeth back inside, barring the door. You're hit, he said, his face pale as he examined her arm. Blood was soaking through the sleeve of the dress. It's not bad, she gasped, though the pain was intense. Just grazed me. Levi tore a strip from a sheet and quickly bound the wound. Change of plans, we make our stand here. Outside, the attackers called to each other, coordinating their approach. They were no longer in a hurry, confident they had their quarry trapped. Levi positioned himself at the rear window, rifle ready. Can you shoot? He asked Elizabeth. My father taught me. It's been years, though. He handed her his revolver. 5 shots left, make them count. Elizabeth checked the gun with shaking hands. Levi, if we don't make it, we will, he interrupted firmly. I'm not losing you too. The conviction in his voice gave her courage. She took up position near the front window, ignoring the throbbing pain in her arm. For what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, they waited in tense silence. Then a voice called out again. We know the girl's hit, Caldwell. Give her up and save yourself. Who sent you? Levi shouted back. The Blackwells wouldn't waste men tracking us this far. There was a pause, then laughter. Sheriff's got a hefty reward out for both of you, says you kidnapped his prisoner and killed his deputy. Levi and Elizabeth exchanged glances. He's trying to use the law to hunt us, Levi said quietly. Smart. A flaming arrow suddenly arced through the air, landing on the cabin's roof with a dull thud. Within seconds, the dry wood began to catch. They're burning us out, Elizabeth realized with horror. Levi's expression hardened. Time for Plan B. We had a Plan B, he moved to the bearskin rug, pulling it aside to reveal a trapdoor. Root cellar. There's a tunnel that leads to a gulch about 100 yards from here. I dug it as an escape route. More flaming arrows hit the roof and smoke began to fill the cabin. Levi lifted the trapdoor and helped Elizabeth down into the dark space below. He followed quickly, pulling the door shut above them. In the pitch blackness, Elizabeth felt Levi's hand find hers. Stay close, he whispered, leading her forward. The tunnel was narrow and low, forcing them to crouch as they moved. Earth occasionally crumbled from the ceiling, and the air was stale and heavy. Elizabeth's wounded arm throbbed with each movement, but she pushed through the pain, focusing on Levi's steady presence ahead of her. After what felt like an eternity of crawling through darkness, Elizabeth felt a change in the air, fresher, cooler. Levi stopped, and she heard the sound of him pushing against something. Almost there, he whispered. When I open this, we'll be in a dry creek bed. We need to run east, toward those hills in the distance. I'm ready, Elizabeth assured him, though in truth she felt light-headed from pain and exertion. Levi pushed open the concealed exit, and they emerged into the twilight. Behind them, smoke billowed from the burning cabin, but their attackers were nowhere in sight, still watching the trap they thought contained their prey. Now, Levi urged, pulling Elizabeth to her feet. They ran, keeping low among the rocks and brush of the gulch. Elizabeth's wounded arm hung uselessly at her side, but adrenaline propelled her forward. They had covered perhaps half a mile when shouts erupted behind them. Their escape had been discovered. "Keep going," Levi urged as gunshots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt around them. They reached a stand of pines just as darkness fell completely, the dense trees offering some protection. Levi pulled Elizabeth behind a fallen log as their pursuers' voices grew closer. "We can't outrun them," Elizabeth whispered, her breathing labored. "Not with my injury slowing us down." Levi's face was grim in the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. "We don't need to outrun them, just outsmart them." He checked his rifle. "I've got an idea, but you won't like it. Tell me, I'll draw them off. You continue east to Miller's Creek. There's a homestead there, elderly couple named Parker. Tell them Levi Caldwell sent you, they'll help you." Elizabeth gripped his arm. "No, we stay together. Ellie, you're injured. You need medical attention, and we need that ledger to stop this for good." His hand came up to cup her face, the tender gesture surprising them both. "I'll find you, I promise." Before she could protest further, voices called from much closer than expected. Levi's expression hardened with determination. He leaned forward suddenly, pressing his lips to hers in a brief but intense kiss. "Go east until you hit water," he whispered against her lips. "Follow it north to the Parkers. Wait for me there." Then he was gone, crashing through the underbrush to the west, deliberately making noise to draw attention. Elizabeth heard the shouts of their pursuers change direction, following Levi's trail. With tears streaming down her face, she forced herself to move east as instructed. The night was cold, her wound was painful, and every shadow seemed to hide potential danger. But Elizabeth kept going, driven by a new determination not just to survive, but to see Levi again. She walked through the night, guided by the stars and Levi's instructions. Near dawn, she heard the welcome sound of running water and found the creek he'd mentioned. Following it north as daylight broke, Elizabeth eventually spotted a small homestead nestled in a gentle valley, a modest cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, a barn and fenced fields with a few cattle grazing peacefully. Elizabeth approached cautiously, her strength nearly spent. An elderly woman was hanging laundry in the yard and spotted her immediately. "Land sakes," the woman exclaimed, hurrying toward Elizabeth. "Child, what's happened to you? Are you Mrs. Parker?" Elizabeth asked, swaying slightly on her feet. "I am, Martha Parker." The woman's kind face creased with concern. "You're hurt, dear." "Levi Caldwell sent me," Elizabeth managed before her knees buckled. She awoke in a comfortable bed, her wounded arm properly bandaged and the pain dulled to a manageable throb. Martha Parker sat nearby in a rocking chair, knitting needles clicking softly. "There you are," Martha said warmly when she noticed Elizabeth was awake. "You gave us quite a scare, my dear." "How long have I been asleep?" Elizabeth asked, trying to sit up. "Nearly a full day." "My husband George tended your wound. He was a field surgeon during the war." Martha set aside her knitting and helped Elizabeth into a sitting position. "You mentioned Levi Caldwell," Elizabeth nodded. "We were attacked. He led them away to give me time to escape." Martha's expression grew troubled. "Levi is like a son to us. He saved our George from a lynch mob some years back when he was falsely accused of a crime." She poured a cup of water from a pitcher and handed it to Elizabeth. "Now, why don't you tell me everything?" Elizabeth did, starting with her interrupted wedding and ending with their separation in the woods. Martha listened without interruption, her weathered face showing concern but not surprise. "The Blackwells have terrorized this territory for years," she said when Elizabeth finished. "George and I have lost friends to their violence. Levi said we need to retrieve a ledger that could bring them to justice," Elizabeth explained. "It's hidden in Willow Creek." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "George rode into town this morning to sell some cheese and butter. He should be back soon with news." As if summoned by his name, the door opened and a tall, white-haired man entered. "Martha, he stopped when he saw Elizabeth sitting up. Our guest is awake. George, this is Elizabeth Vance. She came to us from Levi." George Parker's kind eyes crinkled with concern. "Miss Vance, I'm glad to see you recovering." He removed his hat, revealing a bald head fringed with white hair. I'm afraid I have troubling news from town. Elizabeth's heart clenched. Is it Levi? There's no word of him, George said, which could be good or bad. But the news is all about the reward for your capture, $500, dead or alive. They're saying you conspired with a Pinkerton agent to murder your fiancé and steal valuable property. That's absurd. Elizabeth exclaimed. Richard was killed by the Blackwells. Truth matters little when money's involved, George said grimly. Every bounty hunter and desperate soul in the territory will be looking for you too now. Martha took Elizabeth's hand. You'll stay here until you're stronger and Levi returns. No one will think to look for you here. I can't put you in danger, Elizabeth protested. George's expression turned steely. The Blackwells took our son 15 years ago. He was a marshal who wouldn't be bought. They've taken enough from this territory. It's time someone stood against them. For 3 days, Elizabeth recovered at the Parker homestead, helping with chores as her strength returned and watching anxiously for any sign of Levi. On the morning of the 4th day, as she was collecting eggs from the henhouse, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Peering cautiously through a crack in the wall, Elizabeth saw a rider dismounting at the main house, a tall man in a dusty coat. Her heart leaped when she recognized Levi. Though he looked haggard and had a crude bandage wrapped around his thigh, she rushed from the henhouse, all caution forgotten. Levi, he turned at her voice, his exhausted face lighting up. Ellie. Elizabeth found herself running to him, and he caught her in a fierce embrace despite his obvious injuries. You're alive, she breathed against his chest. I was so worried. Told you I'd find you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled back slightly to examine her bandaged arm. How bad? Just a graze, already healing. She touched the bandage on his leg. You're hurt. Bullet caught me as I was leaving town. It's not serious. Elizabeth frowned. Leaving town, you went to Willow Creek alone. Before he could answer, Martha and George emerged from the house. There were emotional greetings as the elderly couple embraced Levi like the son they'd lost. Inside, over coffee and Martha's fresh bread, Levi explained what had happened after they separated. He'd successfully led their pursuers away, losing them in a rocky canyon before doubling back toward Willow Creek. I couldn't risk waiting, he explained. With the reward out, that mining office would be the first place they'd search once they figured out what we were after. Did you get the ledger? Elizabeth asked anxiously. In answer, Levi reached inside his coat and produced a small, leather-bound book. Right where Richard's code said it would be. He placed it on the table. Names, dates, amounts, locations, everything we need to bring down the Blackwells and every corrupt official on their payroll. Including Sheriff Harmon, Elizabeth asked, especially him. Levi's expression was grim. But there's more. I found out why they killed Richard and want you dead. It wasn't just about the ledger. Elizabeth waited, her heart pounding. Richard recognized one of the Blackwell brothers from before from a bank robbery in Kansas 5 years ago, a robbery where the bank president was killed. Levi's eyes held hers. The bank president was your father, Ellie. Richard figured it out from a photograph you showed him. The revelation hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. My father's death wasn't an accident during a robbery. It was murder, plain and simple. And Richard was gathering evidence to prove it, along with all their other crimes. Levi reached across the table to take her hand. That's why they couldn't let either of you live. You might have known what he knew. Elizabeth sat in stunned silence, memories of her father flooding back. He had been kind and honest, a pillar of their community. His death had devastated her, leaving her alone in the world until Richard had come into her life. What do we do now? She finally asked, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. I've sent a telegram to my superiors at the Pinkerton agency, Levi explained. They're dispatching agents and federal marshals. They'll be here within a week to make arrests. A week is a long time when there's a price on your heads, George observed. Levi nodded. That's why we need to find somewhere safer to wait. I can't put you and Martha at risk any longer. Nonsense, Martha said firmly. This is the last place anyone would look for you. Besides, you're in no condition to travel with that leg, Levi Caldwell. She's right, Elizabeth added. We'll be careful. No one has connected me to the Parkers. Levi looked like he wanted to argue but eventually relented. 3 more days. By then, my legs should be strong enough to ride, and we'll have received confirmation that the marshals are on their way. That evening, as Martha prepared dinner and George tended to the livestock, Elizabeth found Levi sitting on the porch, staring at the distant mountains. She sat beside him, conscious of a new awareness between them, something that had been growing since that desperate kiss in the forest. "I never thanked you properly," she said quietly, "for saving my life multiple times now." Levi turned to her, his blue eyes serious. "I made a promise to Richard." "Is that the only reason you've risked so much?" He was silent for a long moment. "It was, at first." Elizabeth's heart quickened at the implication. "And now, instead of answering directly," Levi said, "I've been thinking about what happens after this is over, after the Blackwells are brought to justice." "What do you mean?" "You'll be free to go wherever you want, start a new life." His expression was carefully neutral. "Have you thought about where that might be?" Elizabeth hadn't, not really. The past week had been about survival, not future plans. "I don't know. There's nothing left for me in Willow Creek, perhaps St. Louis with my aunt." "Or you could stay," Levi said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. "Here, I mean, in Montana territory." Elizabeth studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the vulnerability he was trying to conceal. "Why would I do that?" Levi finally met her gaze directly. "Because I'll be staying. At least for a while. The Pinkertons have offered me a permanent position in the territory, heading up a new office in Helena." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Elizabeth said carefully. "It is." Levi took a deep breath. "It would be better with you in it." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Elizabeth felt a warmth spreading through her chest, unexpected but not unwelcome. "Levi, we've known each other a week, under extraordinary circumstances." "I know." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I'm not asking for promises, just possibility." Elizabeth thought of Richard, of the future they'd planned that had been violently taken from them. She had loved him truly. But in the past week, she discovered a strength in herself she hadn't known existed, and a connection with Levi that felt different, forged in fire and built on mutual respect. "Possibility," she repeated softly. "I think I can agree to that." The smile that transformed Levi's face made her heart skip. He lifted her hand to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "That's enough for now." They sat together as twilight descended, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. For the first time since her wedding day, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope for the future. That hope was tested the very next morning when the sound of approaching riders woke them at dawn. Levi was instantly alert, gun in hand as he peered through the window. "6 riders," he reported grimly. "Armed, coming fast," George appeared, his own rifle ready. "Friends of yours, not likely." Levi turned to Elizabeth. "Get Martha and head for the root cellar. If things go bad, there's a tunnel like the one at my cabin. It leads to a cave in the hillside." Elizabeth wanted to protest, to stay and fight alongside him, but the determined set of his jaw told her this wasn't the time to argue. She nodded and hurried to find Martha. The older woman was already gathering supplies: water, bread, a medical kit. "I heard," she said simply. "Come, dear." As they headed for the trapdoor hidden beneath a rug in the pantry, Elizabeth heard the riders pulling up outside. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of dust-covered men, their faces hard beneath their hats. When she recognized with a chill Deputy Sanders from Willow Creek, Sheriff Harmon's right-hand man. "Martha, those are the men who locked me in the barn," she whispered urgently. "They've found us." Martha's expression grew determined. "The tunnel it is, then." She handed Elizabeth the supplies and lifted the trapdoor. "Go on, I'll be right behind you." Elizabeth descended into the cool darkness, lamp in hand. Martha followed, carefully lowering the door above them. They moved quickly through the narrow passage, the sounds from above muffled but still audible men's voices, demanding and threatening. They had gone perhaps 50 yards when gunfire erupted. Elizabeth froze, her heart pounding. "Levi," she whispered. Martha gripped her arm. "He and George can handle themselves. We need to keep moving." They continued through the tunnel, emerging eventually into a small cave set into a hillside, concealed by brush. From this vantage point, they could see the Parker homestead below and the violent confrontation taking place. 2 men already lay motionless in the yard. The remaining 4 had taken cover behind the well and wagon, exchanging fire with the house. As they watched, another attacker fell, clutching his chest. 3 down, Martha murmured, her face set in grim lines. We should help them, Elizabeth said, spotting a rifle Martha had stored in the cave. No, you're the one they want. If they get that ledger, all of this Richard's death, your suffering, all of it will have been for nothing. Martha's expression softened slightly. Trust Levi, trust George. Elizabeth reluctantly agreed, though every shot made her flinch. The gunfight continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, suddenly, it was over. The remaining attackers retreated, dragging their wounded with them. They're leaving, Elizabeth said with relief. Martha remained cautious. Wait, it could be a trick. They watched as the riders disappeared down the trail, leaving their dead behind. Still, Martha insisted they wait for a signal before returning to the house. An hour passed before they heard it, 3 short whistles, the all clear they'd arranged with George and Levi. Only then did they emerge from hiding and make their way back to the homestead. The scene that greeted them was grim, 3 bodies in the yard, blood staining the dirt. But the house still stood, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal George, a bandage around his arm but otherwise unharmed. Where's Levi? Elizabeth asked immediately, fear clutching at her heart. Inside, George replied. Took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live. Elizabeth rushed past him to find Levi sitting at the kitchen table, his face pale but determined as he examined a map. His left shoulder was bandaged, a spot of red seeping through the white cloth. You're hurt, she said, moving to his side. Levi looked up, relief washing over his features at the sight of her. It's nothing, barely grazed me. That's the second time you've been shot protecting me, Elizabeth said, touching his good shoulder gently. Please don't make a habit of it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'll try not to, George joined them, pouring coffee for everyone. Those men will be back, and with reinforcements next time. We drove them off, but they know what they're after now. The ledger, Elizabeth said. Levi nodded grimly. And you, Deputy Sanders recognized you. He'll report back to Harmon and the Blackwells. We need to move, George said. All of us. This place isn't safe anymore. Martha began gathering essentials. We have a hunting cabin up in the high country. It's remote, difficult to find unless you know where to look. We can't ask you to abandon your home, Elizabeth protested. George's expression was resolute. This land has seen blood before. It will recover. Lives won't. Within an hour, they had packed essential supplies and were ready to depart. The bodies of the attackers were left where they fell, a warning to any who might follow. George led the way on his sturdy farm horse, with Martha riding behind him. Elizabeth and Levi followed on his chestnut stallion, Ellie in front with Levi's good arms secured around her waist. They traveled all day, taking a circuitous route through difficult terrain, rocky slopes, dense forests, and shallow streams that would hide their tracks. By nightfall, they had reached the cabin Martha had mentioned, a simple one-room structure built of logs and set against a cliff face for protection from the elements. Not much to look at, George apologized as they dismounted stiffly, but it's sturdy and well hidden. Inside, the cabin was basic but serviceable, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with benches, 2 narrow beds, and shelves stocked with preserved food and supplies. George immediately set about starting a fire while Martha arranged their belongings. Elizabeth helped Levi to one of the beds, concerned by his pallor. Let me check your wound, she insisted. He didn't argue, which worried her further. When she removed the bandage, she was relieved to find the bullet had indeed just grazed him, leaving a deep furrow but no serious damage. She cleaned and rebandaged it with supplies from Martha's medical kit. Thank you, Levi said softly, catching her hand as she finished. For everything, Elizabeth smiled. I'm just returning the favor. That night, after a simple meal of beans and salt pork, they discussed their situation. The ledger lay open on the table between them, its pages filled with damning evidence against the Blackwell gang and their associates. The marshals should arrive within 4 days, Levi explained. Once they have this ledger, they'll have everything they need to make arrests. Can we hold out that long? Elizabeth asked, thinking of the determined men who had attacked the Parker homestead. We'll have to, George said firmly. This cabin isn't on any map. The only approach is the way we came, which can be easily defended. We'll take turns keeping watch, Levi added. 2-hour shifts through the night. Despite their precarious situation, Elizabeth felt safer than she had since her wedding day. Surrounded by people who were willing to risk everything to protect her and see justice done, she found a strange peace in the remote cabin. That night, as George took the first watch and Martha slept in one of the beds, Elizabeth sat with Levi near the fire. The dancing flames cast a warm glow over his features, softening the lines of worry that had etched themselves there. "Tell me about your life before all this," she said quietly. What did Levi Caldwell dream of becoming before he was a Pinkerton? He looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "Honestly, a rancher. My father had a small spread before he died. I always thought I'd have something like it someday, good land, some cattle, horses." He smiled wryly. "Simple dreams. They don't sound simple to me," Elizabeth said. "They sound perfect." Levi studied her face in the firelight. "What about you? What did Elizabeth Vance dream of before she was a banker's daughter and a prospective bride?" Elizabeth considered the question. "I wanted to teach. I love books, learning. I thought I might open a school someday," she sighed. "Then my father died and survival became more important than dreams." "Dreams matter," Levi said softly. "They're what we're fighting for, the chance to have them again." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Elizabeth felt that now familiar connection strengthen. Without thinking, she reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the scar along his jawline. "How did you get this?" she asked. "Bar fight in Dodge City," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "Not my finest moment. I like it," Elizabeth said. "It tells a story, like all your scars, I imagine. Some stories are better left untold." "Not to me," she said firmly. "I want to know them all, Levi Caldwell." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent warmth spiraling through her. "Be careful what you wish for, Ellie Vance. You might get more than you bargained for." "I'm counting on it," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by George clearing his throat. "My watch is up," he said, his eyes twinkling with knowing amusement. "Who's next?" "I'll go," Levi said, reluctantly releasing Elizabeth's hand. "No, you need to rest that shoulder," she insisted. "I'll take this watch." Despite his protests, Elizabeth was firm. She took George's rifle and positioned herself near the window, where she could see the approach to the cabin while still being concealed by shadows. The night passed uneventfully, each taking their turn at watch. By morning, Levi's color had improved, and his wound seemed to be healing cleanly. Over a breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, they discussed their plans for the day. "We need to scout the surrounding area," George suggested. "Know our escape routes if the worst happens." "I'll go," Levi volunteered. "My leg's much better and I need to stretch it anyway." "Not alone," Elizabeth insisted. "I'll come with you." Martha and George exchanged glances. "We'll stay and prepare defenses," Martha said, "just in case." After breakfast, Elizabeth and Levi set out, moving carefully through the pine forest that surrounded the cabin. Levi pointed out natural features that could provide cover or serve as landmarks if they needed to flee. Despite the serious purpose of their expedition, Elizabeth found herself enjoying the crisp mountain air and the breathtaking views that occasionally opened up between the trees. "It's beautiful here," she remarked as they paused on a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast valley. "Peaceful." Levi nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Montana Territory has some of the most beautiful land I've ever seen, wild but with a kind of quiet strength to it." "Like its people," Elizabeth observed, thinking of the Parkers and their quiet determination. "Like you," Levi said, his gaze shifting to her face. Elizabeth felt herself flush under his admiring look. "I'm not sure wild is how I'd describe myself." "No," Levi smiled. "A woman who faces down killers, escapes from burning cabins, and takes on armed men doesn't qualify as a little wild, when you put it that way." Elizabeth laughed, the sound echoing off the rocks around them. It felt good to laugh, to remember that there was still joy to be found even in dangerous times. Levi's expression grew serious. "You know, if we make it through this, when we make it through this," Elizabeth corrected firmly. "When we make it through this," he amended with a smile. "I was thinking of looking for land. Near Helena, maybe, good grazing country." For that ranch you dreamed of, he nodded. The Pinkertons pay well and I've saved most of it. I could start small, build up gradually. It sounds wonderful, Elizabeth said sincerely. It would be. Levi hesitated, then added, especially if I had a partner, someone to share it with. Elizabeth's heart quickened. Levi, he held up a hand. I'm not asking for anything now, just thinking about possibilities. His eyes held hers. Remember. I remember, she said softly. They continued their scouting mission, the unspoken promise between them adding a new dimension to their companionship. By midday, they had mapped out the area thoroughly and were heading back toward the cabin when Levi suddenly froze, raising a hand to signal silence. Elizabeth tensed, listening. At first, she heard nothing unusual, just the wind in the pines and the occasional call of a bird. Then she caught the distant sound of horses moving through the forest. Levi pulled her down behind a fallen log, his expression grim. At least 3 riders, he whispered. Coming from the west. How did they find us? Elizabeth whispered back. Might not be them. Could be hunters or trappers. They waited in tense silence as the sounds grew closer. Levi had drawn his pistol, and Elizabeth gripped the knife he had given her earlier that morning. Through gaps in the underbrush, they finally caught sight of the riders' 3 men, heavily armed, moving with purpose rather than the casual attitude of hunters. Bounty hunters, Levi breathed. Not Harmon's men, but looking for us all the same. What do we do? Get back to the cabin and warn the Parkers. We'll have to move again. They began to crawl backward, keeping the log between them and the approaching riders. They had almost reached the cover of denser trees when Elizabeth's foot dislodged a stone, sending it tumbling down the slight incline with a clatter. The riders immediately halted, guns drawn. Who's there? One called out. Show yourself, Levi cursed under his breath. Run, he whispered to Elizabeth. Straight back to the cabin, I'll hold them off. Not without you, she insisted. Ellie, please, the ledger is what matters. Get it and the Parkers to safety. Before she could argue further, Levi rose to a crouch and fired 2 rapid shots at the bounty hunters, forcing them to dive for cover. Go, he shouted. Heart pounding, Elizabeth ran, weaving through the trees as gunfire erupted behind her. She wanted desperately to look back to make sure Levi was following, but knew every second counted. She focused on the path ahead, her mind racing as fast as her feet. She burst into the clearing around the cabin, shouting for the Parkers. Bounty hunters coming from the west. George appeared immediately, rifle in hand. Where's Levi? Holding them off. We need to go now. Martha emerged from the cabin, already carrying their essential supplies. The horses are ready. We can't leave without Levi, Elizabeth insisted, torn between the need to flee and her fear for the man who had come to mean so much to her. We won't, George assured her, his weathered face set with determination. Martha, take Elizabeth and head north. I'll wait for Levi. George, Martha began, her expression anguished. No arguments, woman, not now. George's voice softened. I'll be right behind you with the boy. Martha nodded once, her lips pressed into a thin line. She handed Elizabeth a saddlebag. The ledger's in here. Guard it with your life. Elizabeth took it, her hands shaking. I will. They mounted quickly, Martha on her mare and Elizabeth on Levi's chestnut. As they prepared to ride out, the sound of a single horse approaching at a gallop made them pause. A moment later, Levi burst from the trees, his face grim. They're right behind me, he called. 3 more joined them. Mount up, son, George shouted, already swinging onto his own horse. We're leaving? Levi didn't waste time with questions. He vaulted onto the back of Elizabeth's horse, his arms coming around her to take the reins. Hiya. He shouted, spurring the animal forward. They rode hard, following a steep trail that led higher into the mountains. Behind them, they could hear the pursuit shouts and the thunder of hooves. George led them through increasingly difficult terrain, forcing their pursuers to slow down. There's an old mining trail ahead, he called back to them. Too narrow for more than 1 horse at a time. We can lose them there. The trail appeared suddenly, a thin path cut into the side of a cliff, with a sheer drop on one side and solid rock on the other. George went first, followed by Martha, with Levi and Elizabeth bringing up the rear. The path was terrifying, barely wide enough for the horses, with loose stones that occasionally gave way beneath their hooves, plummeting into the void below. Elizabeth clung to the saddle horn, acutely aware of Levi's solid presence at her back. "Don't look down," he murmured in her ear. "Just straight ahead." They were halfway across when gunfire erupted from behind them. The bounty hunters had reached the start of the trail and were taking shots at them from that relatively secure position. "Faster," George urged. A bullet ricocheted off the rock face near Elizabeth's head, showering her with stone fragments. Levi hunched over her protectively, using his body as a shield as more shots followed. Then came a sound that made Elizabeth's blood run cold, a cry of pain from Martha, followed by George's anguished shout. Elizabeth turned to see Martha slumping in her saddle, her husband reaching desperately to steady her. "Martha's hit," Levi called, his voice tight with tension. They couldn't stop, not on the narrow path with bullets still flying. They pressed on, reaching the far side of the cliff where the trail widened into a small plateau. Only then did they halt, George immediately dismounting to tend to his wife. "How bad?" Levi asked, helping Elizabeth down before joining George. The older man's face was ashen as he examined the wound in Martha's side. "Bad enough. She needs a doctor." Martha's eyes fluttered open. "Don't fuss, old man, I've had worse." "Liar," George said fondly, though his hands trembled as he applied pressure to the wound. Levi surveyed their surroundings. "We can't stay here, they'll find another way around." "There's a mining town about 10 miles north," George said. "Prosperity, they have a doctor." 10 miles in her condition. Elizabeth knelt beside Martha, alarmed by the pallor of the older woman's face. "No choice," George said grimly. "Help me get her back on the horse." Together, they managed to get Martha mounted, with George climbing up behind her to hold her steady. Levi and Elizabeth remounted their own horse, and they set off again, now moving at a slower pace necessitated by Martha's injury. The sun was setting by the time they reached Prosperity, a small but bustling mining town nestled in a valley. Lights glowed from cabin windows, and the sounds of a piano and raucous laughter emanated from a saloon on the main street. They rode directly to the doctor's house, marked by a small sign at the edge of town. An elderly man with spectacles answered their urgent knocking, taking in the situation with a professional calm that Elizabeth found reassuring. "Bring her in," he said, leading them to a back room set up as a surgery. "Gunshot wound, I presume." "Bounty hunters," George confirmed, laying his wife gently on the examining table. "After these two." The doctor glanced at Levi and Elizabeth but asked no questions. "I'll do what I can. Wait outside, please." George refused to leave his wife's side, but Levi led Elizabeth to a small waiting room. They sat in silence for a time, the events of the day catching up with them. "This is my fault," Elizabeth finally said, her voice hollow. "Martha would never have been shot if not for me." Levi took her hand firmly. "This is the Blackwell's fault and Sheriff Harmon's, not yours. But the Parkers made their choice. They're fighting for what's right, Ellie, same as us." Levi's blue eyes were intense in the lamplight. "We honor their sacrifice by finishing this." Elizabeth nodded slowly, drawing strength from his conviction. "What do we do now?" "Wait for news about Martha. Then find a telegraph office. My contact at the Pinkertons needs to know our location." Levi ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "And we need to be ready to move again. Those bounty hunters won't give up easily, not with the price on our heads." The door opened and George emerged, looking every one of his years. "She'll live," he reported, his voice rough with emotion. "Bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. Doc says she needs rest, but she'll recover." Relief washed over Elizabeth. "Thank God. She's asking for you both," George added. They followed him back to the surgery where Martha lay pale but alert on the table, now covered with a clean sheet. The doctor was washing his hands in a basin, his expression satisfied. "There you are," Martha said weakly when she saw them. "Gave you quite a scare, didn't I?" "Nothing we couldn't handle," Levi said with forced lightness, taking her frail hand. Martha squeezed his fingers. "You need to go, those men will be looking for you here." "We're not leaving you," Elizabeth protested. "Don't be foolish, child. George and I will be fine. The doctor has agreed to keep us hidden." Martha's eyes were lucid despite her weakness. "You have to get that ledger to the authorities, finish what Richard started." Elizabeth looked to Levi, torn between her duty to the mission and her loyalty to these people who had risked everything for them. "She's right," Levi said quietly. "The sooner we get the ledger to the marshals, the sooner this ends for everyone." "There's a telegraph office here," George added. "Send your message, then keep moving." Elizabeth knelt beside Martha's bed, taking the older woman's hand. "We'll come back for you when it's over," Martha smiled. "I know you will, dear. Now go before those bounty hunters find this town." Reluctantly, Elizabeth and Levi said their goodbyes. The doctor provided them with fresh supplies and directions to the telegraph office. Before they left, George pressed something into Levi's hand, a small leather pouch. "Wedding rings," the older man explained. "Mine and Martha's from our early days before we could afford better. Might help you blend in on the road. A married couple draws less attention than a man and woman traveling alone." Levi accepted the gift with solemn gratitude. "We'll return them." "See that you do," George said gruffly. "In person." Outside, the night had fully descended, the streets of Prosperity illuminated by lanterns and the lights spilling from windows. Levi led Elizabeth toward the telegraph office, both of them keeping their heads down to avoid attracting attention. The telegraph operator was a young man with an inquisitive expression that immediately made Elizabeth nervous. Levi seemed to share her concern. "Evening," the operator greeted them. "Help you folks. Need to send a telegram," Levi said, his tone deliberately casual. "Private business matter." The young man nodded. "Where to?" "Helena, Pinkerton office." The operator's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pinkerton's a important business, just routine," Levi said smoothly, sliding a folded paper across the counter along with several coins. "Send it exactly as written, if you please." The operator glanced at the message, then at the generous payment. "Yes, sir, right away." As they waited for confirmation that the message had been sent, Elizabeth noticed the operator studying them with increasing interest. When the reply came a brief acknowledgement that marshals were already en route to Prosperity, the young man's expression had become decidedly calculating. "Your message is confirmed," he told Levi, handing him the reply. "Anything else I can help you with?" "No, that's all. Thank you." Levi took Elizabeth's arm, guiding her toward the door. Once outside, he quickened their pace. "He recognized us," Levi said quietly, "or at least suspects who we are." "What do we do?" Elizabeth asked, resisting the urge to look over her shoulder. "Get supplies, then leave town. Now." Levi steered them toward a general store that was still open. "The marshals will be here by tomorrow afternoon. We just need to stay alive until then." In the store, they quickly gathered essentials: food, ammunition, a blanket. Levi added a plain dark dress and shawl to their purchases. "To replace your borrowed clothes," he explained to Elizabeth. The storekeeper wrapped their goods with efficient movements. "You folks passing through?" he asked conversationally. "Just married," Levi replied, slipping one of the borrowed rings onto Elizabeth's finger and displaying his own. "Heading to visit my wife's family in Helena." "Congratulations," the storekeeper said, though his eyes held a hint of suspicion. "Strange time of night to be traveling." "Got a late start," Levi said easily. "Thought we'd make a few more miles before camping." They paid for their supplies and left, both aware that their presence in the small town was attracting more attention with each passing minute. "Where's your horse?" Elizabeth asked as they headed down the main street. "Behind the doctor's. I thought it best not to leave it in plain sight." They had just turned down a side street when Elizabeth heard rapid footsteps behind them. She glanced back to see the telegraph operator hurrying toward the saloon, where a group of rough-looking men were gathered outside. "Levi," she warned quietly. He had already noticed. "Walk faster. Don't run." They increased their pace, heading for the doctor's house by a circuitous route. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by the sound of multiple sets of footsteps. "There they are," someone called. $500 to whoever catches them." "Run," Levi commanded, grabbing Elizabeth's hand. They sprinted through the darkened streets, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. Elizabeth's heart pounded, her breath coming in gasps as they ducked down alleys and between buildings. "Almost there," Levi encouraged as they approached the doctor's house from the rear. Suddenly, two men stepped out from the shadows ahead of them, blocking their path. "Going somewhere?" one asked, a pistol gleaming in his hand. Levi pushed Elizabeth behind him, his own gun appearing in his hand. "Step aside, we don't want trouble." "That's too bad," the second man said. "Cause trouble's what you got." From behind, more men approached, closing the trap. Elizabeth clutched the saddlebag containing the ledger, her mind racing for a way out. "Levi Caldwell and Elizabeth Vance," one of the newcomers announced. "Worth $500 dead or alive. I'm thinking dead might be easier." "Think again," came a new voice from the darkness. Everyone turned to see George Parker standing on the doctor's back porch, a shotgun leveled at the bounty hunters. "My wife's trying to rest," he said conversationally. "You're making a terrible racket." The momentary distraction was all Levi needed. He fired twice in rapid succession, dropping the two men in front of them. Elizabeth ducked as the other bounty hunters returned fire, bullets splintering the wood of the doctor's porch around George. "Get to the horse," Levi shouted, pushing her toward the small stable behind the house. Elizabeth ran, heart in her throat, as gunfire erupted in earnest behind her. She reached the stable and found Levi's chestnut already saddled, as if George had anticipated their hasty departure. She was untying it when Levi burst in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "George?" she asked fearfully, holding them off. "Come on," they mounted quickly, Levi once again taking position behind Elizabeth. As they burst from the stable, more shots rang out, but they were already galloping down the back alley toward the edge of town. The main road out of Prosperity would be watched, so Levi guided them along a miner's trail that wound through the hills. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit gradually faded, though Elizabeth knew it was only a temporary reprieve. "Where are we going?" she asked when they finally slowed to rest the horse. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles from here," Levi replied, wiping blood from his face. "Belonged to a rancher who died last winter. We can hole up there until the marshals arrive." "What about George and Martha?" "The doctor will protect them, and once the marshals get to Prosperity, they'll be safe." Levi sounded confident, but Elizabeth could hear the underlying worry in his voice. They rode through the night, the trail becoming increasingly difficult to follow in the darkness. The line shack appeared just before dawn, a crude, one-room structure built of logs and stone, nestled in a small clearing. Levi dismounted first, scanning the area for any signs of danger before helping Elizabeth down. Inside, the shack was dusty but intact, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and a rough table with a single chair. "Home sweet home," Levi said with grim humor. "At least until the marshals find us. How will they know where to look?" Elizabeth asked, setting the precious saddlebag on the table. "I included this location in my telegram, standard Pinkerton code." Levi began gathering wood for a small fire. "We just need to wait." As the first light of dawn filtered through the single window, Elizabeth changed into the dress they had purchased, grateful to be out of Martha's borrowed clothes, which were now stained with dust and blood. Levi built a small fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal, and they shared a meager breakfast from their supplies. "The marshals should be in Prosperity by noon," Levi said, checking his watch. "Figure another few hours to reach us, depending on how much resistance they encounter." "You think the bounty hunters will fight the marshals?" Elizabeth asked. "Some might, others will cut their losses and run." Levi's expression was grim. "The real question is whether the Blackwells themselves will show up. Would they take that risk for $500? No. But to silence us permanently, maybe." Levi checked his gun, counting his remaining ammunition. "Either way, we'll be ready." They settled in to wait, taking turns keeping watch at the window. The day grew warm, the small shack becoming stuffy despite the open door. By midday, there was still no sign of the marshals or any pursuers. "They should have been here by now," Elizabeth said, worry creeping into her voice. Levi's expression was troubled. "Something's wrong. Maybe they never got my telegram, or maybe the operator sold us out completely." "We can't wait here indefinitely," Levi decided. "If they don't come by sunset, we'll head for Helena ourselves." As the afternoon wore on, tension built in the small space. Every sound from the forest outside made them reach for weapons. By late afternoon, Levi's face was set in grim lines. "I don't like this," he said, peering out the window for the 100th time. "It's too quiet." Elizabeth was about to respond when a twig snapped outside. Levi immediately doused the small fire and motioned for her to get down. They waited in tense silence, weapons ready. More sounds came, the soft crunch of footsteps approaching cautiously. Levi positioned himself by the door, gun raised. Elizabeth took cover behind the table, the ledger secure in the saddlebag at her feet. The footsteps stopped just outside. Then a voice called softly, "Caldwell, U.S. Marshals." Levi didn't lower his gun. "Identify yourself." "Marshal James Harrington, we got your telegram. The Parkers told us where to find you." "How do I know you're really marshals?" Levi called back. There was a pause then. "Your superior at the Pinkertons is Robert Miller. He says to tell you the chickens have come home to roost. Does that mean anything to you?" Levi relaxed slightly. It was a Pinkerton code phrase. Still cautious, he called, "Step into view slowly. Hands where I can see them." A man appeared in the doorway, hands raised. He wore a marshal's badge on his vest, his expression serious but non-threatening. "Just me and 2 deputies, Caldwell. We're here to help." Levi finally lowered his gun. "About time, where have you been?" "Had a bit of trouble in Prosperity," the marshal explained, signaling his men to join him. "Seems the Blackwells got word you were in the area. They sent quite a welcoming committee." "The Parkers?" Elizabeth asked anxiously, standing up from her hiding place. "Safe, the doctor too. We've got men guarding them." Marshal Harrington entered the shack, his gaze sharp as he assessed them both. "You have the ledger." Elizabeth retrieved the saddlebag, handing it to Levi, who removed the small book and offered it to the marshal. "Everything you need to bring down the Blackwells and their operation. Names, dates, amounts, even their connections in law enforcement." Harrington leafed through the pages, his expression hardening. "This is comprehensive. No wonder they were willing to kill for it." He looked up. "You two have done a service to the entire territory. This will put the Blackwells away for good." "What about Sheriff Harmon?" Elizabeth asked. "Already in custody, along with 2 of the Blackwell brothers. We're still searching for the 3rd brother and some of their top lieutenants." The marshal tucked the ledger safely inside his coat. "Now we need to get you both somewhere secure until the rest of the gang is rounded up." Relief washed over Elizabeth. After a week of running and fighting, it was almost over. She looked at Levi, expecting to see the same relief on his face, but his expression remained wary. "Something doesn't feel right," he murmured, moving to the window again. Marshal Harrington frowned. "What's the problem, Caldwell? You don't trust us." "It's not that," Levi said slowly. "It's just, where are your horses?" The question hung in the air for a beat too long. Then Harrington's expression changed, his eyes hardening as his hand moved toward his gun. "Smart man. Too smart for your own good." Levi's reaction was instantaneous. He tackled Elizabeth to the floor as gunfire erupted, the fake marshal and his men drawing their weapons. Wood splintered above their heads as bullets tore through the wall of the shack. Out the back. Levi shouted, pushing Elizabeth toward a small rear window. They crawled desperately as more shots followed, the attackers moving to surround the shack. Elizabeth reached the window first, breaking out the remaining glass with the butt of her pistol before squeezing through the narrow opening. Levi followed, the ledger tucked securely in his shirt. Outside, they ran for the cover of the trees as bullets kicked up dirt around their feet. Elizabeth's heart pounded in her ears, her breath coming in gasps as they plunged into the forest. Behind them, shouts and curses followed, along with the crashing sounds of pursuit. "Keep going," Levi urged as they scrambled up a steep slope, using trees and rocks for handholds. Who were they? Elizabeth gasped. Blackwell men, disguised as marshals. They must have intercepted my telegram. They reached the crest of the ridge and paused momentarily, assessing their options. Below, their pursuers were spreading out, searching methodically through the underbrush. "We need to split up," Levi said, his expression grim. "I'll lead them away. You circle back to the shack, get the horse, and ride for Prosperity. The real marshals should be there by now." "No," Elizabeth protested. "We stay together." "Ellie, listen to me." Levi took her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense. "Someone has to get this ledger to the authorities. It's the only way to end this." "Then you go, I'll lead them away." Levi shook his head. "You know I can't do that, and I can't leave you," Elizabeth insisted, her voice breaking. For a moment, they stared at each other, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. Then Levi made a decision. He removed the ledger from his shirt and pressed it into her hands. "Take this. Whatever happens, get it to the marshals." His expression softened, and he leaned forward to press a fierce, brief kiss to her lips. "I'll find you, Ellie. I promise." Before she could protest further, he was gone, crashing through the underbrush in a direction perpendicular to the shack. Almost immediately, shouts erupted as the pursuers heard him, and the sounds of their pursuit changed course. Elizabeth stood frozen for a moment, torn between following him and completing the mission. The weight of the ledger in her hands finally decided her. Clutching it tightly, she began to make her way carefully back toward the shack, circling wide to avoid any pursuers who might have remained behind. The journey seemed to take forever, each step fraught with danger. Twice she had to hide as men crashed through the forest nearby. Finally, the shack came into view, apparently deserted. Levi's horse was still tethered at the back, nervously pawing the ground. Elizabeth approached cautiously, every sense alert for danger. She had just reached the horse when a voice spoke from the shadows of the shack. "Well now, Miss Vance. Fancy meeting you here." She whirled to find herself facing Sheriff Harmon, his familiar sneer firmly in place despite the dried blood on his temple and the disheveled state of his clothes. He held a shotgun pointed directly at her heart. "The marshals have you in custody," she said, backing slowly toward the horse. Harmon laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "They had me in custody until some of the Blackwell boys arranged a little jailbreak." His expression hardened. "Now hand over that ledger and I might let you live." Elizabeth's mind raced. The ledger was tucked into the bodice of her dress, not immediately visible. "I don't have it. Levi took it." "Liar." Harmon took a step closer. "We saw him give it to you. Now hand it over or I start shooting pieces off you." Elizabeth's back was against the horse now. Her hand slowly reached for the saddle horn, feeling for the revolver she knew Levi kept in a holster there. "Last chance, girl," Harmon growled, raising the shotgun. In one fluid motion, Elizabeth drew the revolver and fired. The shot caught Harmon in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shotgun discharged harmlessly into the ground as he fell. Elizabeth didn't wait to see if he would get up. She mounted the horse and kicked it into motion, galloping away from the shack as Harmon's curses faded behind her. She rode hard in the direction of prosperity, praying that the real marshals were indeed there by now. As she crested a hill, the sound of multiple gunshots in the distance made her rein in sharply. The shots had come from the direction where Levi had led the fake marshals. Heart in her throat, Elizabeth hesitated, torn between her promise to deliver the ledger and her desperate need to know if Levi was alive. After a moment of agonizing indecision, she turned the horse toward the gunfire. The ledger was vital, but Levi was everything. In the days they had spent running and fighting together, he had become more important to her than she had thought possible. The thought of losing him, after losing so much already, was unbearable. She rode carefully, alert for danger, following the echoes of the shots. The forest grew denser, the terrain more difficult. Eventually, she had to dismount and continue on foot, leading the horse through the trees. The sound of men's voices made her freeze. She secured the horse and crept forward, staying low and moving silently as Levi had taught her. Through a screen of bushes, she could see a small clearing where 3 men stood over a 4th figure lying motionless on the ground. Elizabeth's heart nearly stopped when she recognized Levi's form. He wasn't moving, and even from a distance, she could see blood staining his shirt. "Think he's dead?" one of the men asked, nudging Levi with his boot. "Don't matter. Harmon'll want to be sure, and we still need to find the girl in that ledger. Split up. I'll take Caldwell back to the shack. You two find the woman." Elizabeth backed away silently, her mind working frantically. Levi was alive, or at least they weren't certain he was dead. She had to help him, but she couldn't take on 3 armed men alone. Returning to the horse, she quickly formulated a plan. She would circle back to the shack, hoping to intercept the man bringing Levi. With the element of surprise, she might have a chance. She rode swiftly but carefully, taking a route that would bring her to the shack before the man carrying Levi could arrive on foot. As she approached, she saw with a chill that Sheriff Harmon was still there, clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing as he attempted to bandage it. Elizabeth dismounted a safe distance away and crept closer, the revolver steady in her hand. She needed to take Harmon out of the equation before the other man arrived with Levi. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the open, gun aimed at Harmon's head. "Don't move, Sheriff." He froze, then slowly turned to face her, his expression a mixture of pain and fury. "You got lucky before, girl. Won't happen twice. Put your gun on the ground and kick it away," Elizabeth commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Harmon complied slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "You won't shoot an unarmed man, not in cold blood. You don't have it in you." "You'd be surprised what I'm capable of now," Elizabeth replied. "Thanks to you and the Blackwells." A twig snapped in the forest behind her, the man returning with Levi. Elizabeth didn't dare turn, keeping her gun trained on Harmon. "That'll be my friend with yours," Harmon said, a smile spreading across his face. "Looks like the tables have turned again." "Drop your weapon, miss," came a voice from behind her. Elizabeth's mind raced. If she surrendered, they would kill both her and Levi. If she fought, at least one of them had a chance. "I said drop it," the man behind her repeated. "Do as he says, Ellie," came another voice, weaker but unmistakably Levi's. Elizabeth's heart leaped. He was conscious, alive. "Levi, it's over," he said, his voice strained with pain. "The real marshals are coming. I heard them before these guys found me." Harmon laughed. "Nice try, Caldwell, but your woman isn't that stupid." As if on cue, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple riders approaching fast. Harmon's smug expression faltered. "That'll be the Blackwells," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Or it could be the U.S. Marshals," Levi countered. "Want to wait and find out?" The man holding Levi shifted nervously. "Boss, maybe we should shut up," Harmon snapped. "No one's going anywhere until I have that ledger." He turned his cold gaze on Elizabeth. "Hand it over, or I'll have him shoot your man right now." Elizabeth hesitated, the hoofbeats growing louder. She could now make out the glint of metal badges on the approaching riders. "Last chance," Harmon growled. "It's the marshals," Levi confirmed, a note of triumph in his weak voice. "Give it up, Harmon, it's over." With a snarl of rage, Harmon lunged for his discarded gun. Elizabeth fired without hesitation, her bullet catching him in the chest. He collapsed, the weapon still inches from his outstretched hand. The man holding Levi shoved him forward and turned to flee, but he had only taken a few steps when riders burst into the clearing. U.S. Marshals, their badges gleaming in the late afternoon sun, quickly surrounded the area. Elizabeth dropped her gun and ran to Levi, who had fallen to his knees. Blood soaked his left side, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. "You came back for me," he murmured as she reached him. "Of course I did." Elizabeth cradled his face in her hands. "I'll always come back for you." The marshals secured the surviving attacker and approached. Their leader, a stern-faced man with a thick mustache, dismounted and came to stand over them. "Caldwell?" he asked. Levi nodded weakly. "Marshal Davis, right on time." "The ledger?" Davis asked, looking at Elizabeth. With shaking hands, she retrieved it from her bodice and handed it to him. "All of it. Every name, every crime." Davis leafed through it quickly, then tucked it securely into his coat. "Good work, both of you. Now let's get Caldwell some medical attention." As the marshals helped Levi onto a horse, Elizabeth asked, "The Parkers, are they safe?" "Yes, madam. Under protection in Prosperity, the doctor too." Davis helped her mount behind Levi, who leaned back against her, his strength clearly fading. "The Blackwells are done for. 2 brothers in custody, the third shot while resisting arrest. Most of their men are either dead, captured, or on the run." "It's over," Elizabeth breathed, the realization finally sinking in. "It's really over." "Thanks to you and Caldwell," Davis confirmed. "Let's get you both back to town." The ride to Prosperity was slow and careful, with Elizabeth supporting Levi's weakening form. By the time they reached the doctor's house, he was barely conscious, his blood soaking through the makeshift bandages the marshals had applied. The doctor took one look at him and sprang into action, directing his assistants to prepare for surgery. Elizabeth was gently but firmly escorted to a waiting room, where she found Martha Parker sitting up in a chair, her face pale but her eyes bright. "Ellie," the older woman exclaimed. "Thank God you're safe." Elizabeth embraced her carefully, mindful of her wound. "And you, where's George?" Helping the marshals. "Stubborn old fool won't rest." Martha's expression grew concerned. "Levi, shot, the doctor's with him now." Elizabeth sank into a chair, the events of the past week finally catching up with her. "It's over, Martha," The Blackwells are finished. Martha reached over to pat her hand. Thanks to you and that brave young man. They waited together as the doctor worked on Levi. Hours passed, the lamplight growing stronger as darkness fell outside. Finally, the doctor emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. He'll live, he announced without preamble. Bullet missed anything vital, but he lost a lot of blood. He'll need time to recover. Can I see him? Elizabeth asked, rising to her feet. The doctor nodded. Briefly. He's very weak. Elizabeth followed him to a small recovery room where Levi lay still and pale on a narrow bed. His chest rose and fell steadily beneath the clean white bandages, his face relaxed in sleep or unconsciousness. She approached quietly, taking his hand in hers. His skin felt cool but not cold, and when she squeezed gently, his fingers twitched in response. I'm here, she whispered, bending to press a kiss to his forehead. Rest now, I'll be waiting when you wake up. For 3 days, Levi drifted in and out of consciousness while Elizabeth rarely left his side. The marshals came and went, taking statements and bringing news of the Blackwell's operation being dismantled piece by piece. George and Martha visited often, their strength returning as they shared in the victory they had all worked so hard to achieve. On the morning of the 4th day, Elizabeth awoke from an uncomfortable doze in the chair beside Levi's bed to find him watching her, his blue eyes clear and alert for the first time since his surgery. Morning, he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than she had dared to hope. Levi. She was instantly awake, leaning forward to take his hand. How do you feel? Like I've been shot, he replied with a ghost of his old humor. But better than yesterday. Elizabeth smiled, tears of relief threatening to spill. The doctor says you're going to be fine, you just need time to heal. Levi's expression grew serious. The ledger, the Blackwells, it's all taken care of, she assured him. The ledger is with the federal prosecutor in Helena. The Blackwells are finished, most in custody, the rest dead or on the run with nowhere to hide. He relaxed slightly, then squeezed her hand. You came back for me at the shack, you risked everything. Of course I did. Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. You would have done the same for me. In a heartbeat, he confirmed. His eyes searched her face. What happens now, Ellie? She understood the question beneath the question. Now you get better. Then, she took a deep breath. Then we see about those possibilities we discussed. A smile slowly spread across Levi's face, transforming it despite his pallor and the lingering signs of pain. I was thinking about that ranch near Helena. It sounds wonderful, Elizabeth said softly. It would be better with a school nearby, Levi added, for all those children who need educating. Elizabeth's heart swelled at his remembrance of her own dream. That could be arranged, good. Levi's eyes were growing heavy again, exhaustion claiming him despite his obvious desire to continue the conversation. Stay with me, always, Elizabeth promised, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips as he drifted back to sleep. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold against an impossibly blue sky, Elizabeth Vance became Elizabeth Caldwell in a simple ceremony at the Parker homestead. George gave her away, and Martha wept happy tears as they exchanged vows and the same simple gold rings that had helped protect them during their ordeal. The Pinkertons had rewarded Levi handsomely for his role in bringing down the Blackwell gang, providing more than enough capital to purchase a promising piece of land just outside Helena. The small but sturdy ranch house already stood waiting for them, with room to grow as their dreams expanded. As twilight fell on their wedding day, Levi led Elizabeth to the porch of their new home, his arm secure around her waist. Happy, Mrs. Caldwell? He asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Elizabeth leaned into his embrace, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. More than I ever thought possible after everything that happened. Richard would be proud of you, Levi said softly. He loved you enough to try to protect you from the truth, but you were strong enough to face it and see justice done. We both honored those we lost, Elizabeth replied, thinking of Levi's brother and her father, and found something unexpected in the process. Levi turned her in his arms, his expression solemn in the gathering darkness. I never expected you, Ellie. Never thought I'd find someone who could match me step for step through hell and back. Is that what it was? She smiled up at him. It felt more like the beginning of something, not the end. It was, Levi agreed, drawing her closer, the beginning of everything. As his lips found hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Elizabeth knew with absolute certainty that the journey that had begun with tragedy in a sheriff's barn had led her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of a man who had claimed her as his forever, and whom she had claimed in return. 5 years later, the Caldwell ranch had prospered beyond their initial hopes. Cattle grazed on the rolling hills, horses filled the expanded stables, and the ranch house had grown to accommodate their expanding family: twin boys of 4 with their father's blue eyes and determined nature, and a 2-year-old daughter with Elizabeth's honey blonde curls and curious spirit. Elizabeth's school, built on the edge of their property, now served children from throughout the valley, her reputation as a fair but demanding teacher bringing students from as far as Helena itself. Levi still occasionally took assignments from the Pinkertons when a case particularly interested him, but more often he could be found working alongside his ranch hands or teaching his sons to ride their ponies. On a summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Martha Parker's watchful eye, she and George having become honorary grandparents who visited often, Elizabeth joined Levi on the porch swing. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I was thinking," Levi said, his voice thoughtful, "about that day in the sheriff's barn when I first saw you." Elizabeth smiled at the memory, no longer painful after all this time. "You broke in and found a very frightened bride in a torn wedding dress." "I found the strongest woman I'd ever met," he corrected, pressing a kiss to her hair. "And somehow, despite everything, she became mine." "We became each other's," Elizabeth corrected gently. "Partners, equals." Levi smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she loved, always. From the yard, their eldest son called excitedly, having spotted a hawk circling overhead. Elizabeth watched as Levi joined the children, lifting their daughter onto his shoulders so she could see better, the boys clambering at his sides. In that moment, surrounded by the family and home they had built together, Elizabeth felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had begun in fear and loss had led to love and joy beyond anything she could have imagined on that terrible day when she'd fled to the sheriff's office in her wedding dress. Life had taken unexpected turns, but it had delivered her exactly where she was meant to be, with a man who had claimed her as his forever on the very first day, and who proved it with every breath since.